Hello all, this is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3, and in this particular video I want to talk to you about whether the future of university is dead. So if you don't know me, I'm an associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out that I want to pay the favor forward and help you out. So one question I often hear from many different people, many different sources, is that the nature of university is dead, in the sense that the knowledge that is being taught at universities and what we do at universities is not really relevant in the quote-unquote real world. So I thought it would be really interesting to ask the reciprocity community, so this is the YouTube community that's following along, and I asked them, primarily many of them are PhDs, researchers, professors, things like that, and I asked them whether they actually believe the future of universities are dead, and only 11% of them actually indicated that the future of universities is dead. 11% said the future of university is very, very bright. 54% of the people believe that university will change, and only 4% believe that the university will stay the same, and 21% thought that universities will be going completely online in the future. So I thought it was really interesting to see these different results because I agree with some of them and I disagree with some of the other ones, right? So the first one is I don't personally believe that universities are dead and the future of universities are dead. Just look at the basic numbers in terms of the impact that universities have, not only in the sense that they have they employ many different people. Many universities have tens of thousands of people that are working at them. And as well, they often have large economic impact in the communities that they're in. There's numerous studies that have shown that not only sort of more practitioner, white paper kind of oriented article or papers that demonstrate the impact of local universities on the local community, but there's also many different research papers that have looked at this particular impact and looking at the impact of sort of knowledge centers, I guess, that happen on, the greater on industrial production, and they tend to be very highly correlated. Industrial production tends to be highly correlated with universities and being around universities. So if you think about where are the best tech firms in the world right now, or in the United States, they're clustered around Silicon Valley, they're clustered around Boston, which are really, really high in terms of they have a high proportion of higher education and universities in those locations, right? So Stanford, Berkeley, Harvard, Boston U, Boston College, all those different universities. And in virtually every single city, there's a strong connection between industrial production around the world in what is going on at the universities. And so what is really going on here? Why are people believing that the nature of universities is dead? I think most people believe that the nature of universities is dead is because they really don't understand what a university is about and what we actually do at a lot of different universities. Right, so if you believe that university and the knowledge that is created at university is supposed to be practical and very much practical in the sense that the things that you learn today are supposed to be relevant immediately tomorrow or, relevant that day, then yeah, a lot of the stuff that we might teach might seem very esoteric and it might seem very theoretical and it might seem, esoteric is even a big word. It just might not seem necessarily relevant to what you do in the real world. And when to be honest, I was one of those people that I was struck for a long time. What is the importance of the things that you actually study? And I didn't really understand that in the sense that many of the real world things around us actually don't really reflect the stuff that you'd study in your undergraduate studies. And frankly, I don't think I was really truly understanding what we were trying to do. And what you try to do a lot of times is build connections and generalize across many different things as much as you possibly can in university. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do, is generalize in many different dimensions. Such that when you go into a different scenario, you go into a different area, that it will be easier for you to sort of build all these different connections together that other people might have struggled with if they don't necessarily see that. So it's less about the idea of having practical, immediate knowledge, but more about understanding the options and the option value that you have by possessing that particular knowledge. It's a different thing. Because one of them is sort of looking at exploiting the immediate knowledge that you're surrounded in. The other one is looking at how we can grow and connect all the different knowledge sources and ideas that you necessarily have. The other thing that I think we tend to forget about is that universities, a large part of universities is not really related to teaching. And there's a very large component to it that is related to teaching. That's a really important thing. But there is a large component to universities that are actually related to things like research and discovery and going off into different directions and exploring different things that you might not necessarily understand or be able to do in industrial production. We do know, particularly in the United States, it's not true, it varies across all sorts of different countries in terms of the impact. R&D tends to be highly, so there, in the United States, a lot of R&D is actually done by corporations, by businesses. And this varies across different countries, right? So some countries, the state or the government actually does a lot more R&D than it does in the United States and Canada, for example. That's where I'm from. There is a lot more government sort of funded R&D than there is sort of corporate R&D that happens. But it's not necessarily the issue that R&D is happening, research and development is happening in these different equal amounts. It's really about what is being done and the differences between them. I think that's a really important thing to sort of think about. And that's actually kind of really difficult to capture in terms of the different things that the different functions do, right? So you can think of business as one function in society and universities as another function in society. So universities tend, and in the research that happens in universities, tends to be a little bit more sort of theoretical or abstract or removed from sort of quote unquote reality. And what we're trying to do here in a lot of what universities do is what they're trying to do is look at trends that are currently happening or go into different areas that people wouldn't have funded at this immediate time, right? So it's more of kind of a forecasting thing that happens, right? So if you could think of businesses and business function is really concerned about making immediate funds right now, making immediate revenue right now. But universities are thinking about, and the people that are doing this kind of stuff, they don't necessarily think about generating revenue immediately. What they're thinking about is, can we just study this interesting phenomenon? Now, this interesting phenomenon can be studied in many different ways, and these many different ways can have practical implications and commercial implications, and many of them do. But it might not necessarily be really obvious at the beginning, and it might take many years to get to the point where we do see the industrial production or the industrial value or commercial value from the things that you study. So it's more of like a forecasting thing, and having this function in society that some people, and it's a huge part of universities, actually, if you didn't know this, that where some people are doing knowledge discovery and research and going into different directions, they come up with all sorts of really interesting ideas, right? So right now the COVID crisis is happening, so it's 2020, and there's lots of research that's going on right now that is both corporate funded as well as university funded, where people are doing different things and exploring different areas about the whole pandemic. And Business is going to have one function. They're going to be doing one certain things. They're going to be maybe looking for vaccines, for example. But in universities, they might be thinking about what is the social implications of the pandemic. Nobody in business is going to be really interested in that, right? So we have to understand some of that stuff to have, think about it more broadly so we can sort of prevent this stuff from happening in the future, or understand how to actually respond to the COVID crisis, right? So there's all this that goes on, and it's very sort of systematic, as much as systematic as we can. It's not necessarily as clear cut as many of us would believe it would be, but we try to do our best in terms of setting some of these things. So it plays a very vital role in discovering new ideas and exploring new things. That is why a lot of universities actually generate what are called spin-offs in university spin-offs, which are businesses that come out of universities, because graduate students go to those universities. They get all stimulated and all this sort of things going on in their brain, all this sort of synapses and all that things are firing, and people are just really excited, and they come up with all these crazy ideas, and then they're like, I can do this particular thing. Nobody's doing this in the real world, quote unquote real world, and I'm going to go and do that particular thing. And so you get these university spin-offs where maybe it's a graduate student, maybe it's a researcher, whatever, that goes and does something that has sort of quote unquote practical implications from that, right? So many different corporations around the world are university spin-offs that we know of, right? It's probably the most famous one is Google. And very famous university spin-off. Lots of pharmaceutical companies are university spin-offs. There's all sorts of things like this. If you start looking at it, you'd be impressed in terms of the relationships that we have with corporations. So I don't think that they are, mute, or it doesn't make a difference in terms of industrial production. And I think the countries that have the best industrial production and are most suited for the future actually have a very strong higher education system. So they are very much relying on higher education to generate some of this new knowledge. And I think we're going to start seeing that in the countries that are up and coming and that are really doing really well. We're going to see more of an emphasis on higher education. Now, it might change in terms of what the mix of what sort of knowledge is being generated at the different universities, but you can sort of expect over the next 30, 40, 50, 60 years, it's going to be some really basic things about, things like healthcare, for example, things about how the economy works, things about how can we improve efficiency with the tasks that we have, all sorts of really basic things that are going to be the focus of what we're doing, as well as, how do we ensure that we become more entertaining and more fun and more sort of loving, and we have all these sort of human traits and things like that we're going to be much more excited and interested in, that actually get studied at universities. And the more that we understand that, the better off we're going to be in many different ways in terms of universities. So I don't think that they're necessarily dead in any sort of way, and that there is a very strong connection and correlation between what goes on in industry and what goes on in universities. And so you can think about, other things in terms of trends that are happening at this moment, right? So you might be thinking that universities are dead because, we have all these different online resources that are popping up. YouTube, right? So if you're watching this, you're probably on YouTube. What else is there? There's all these different, LinkedIn has sort of learning resources. There's all sorts of private learning groups that you can go to and learn all sorts of different skills and things. There's all over the world it's happening like this way, where you can get access to knowledge pretty easy because of the internet and because things are online, but to believe that simply because we have access to knowledge means that we are going to be excited about that knowledge is a little bit short-sighted, because you have to look at the sort of broader history of what goes on with knowledge and, access to knowledge, right? So you can have to go way, way back when books were starting to be produced, right? So, many of us have had access to books for hundreds of years, right? So all the way back to the printing press when we started printing the Bible. We've had access to books, and many people took up that opportunity and started reading those things, and that might have been the genesis behind the Renaissance, for example, and much of industrial production. But at the same time, a lot of us actually don't do that, and the reason is that we don't know what we don't know. Right, so we're unable, unless somebody is holding your hand and walking you through and being you're forced to understand certain things, that you're just not going to know about those particular things. And this has happened to me repeatedly, many times, where I'm just bumbling along and I think I'm really smart and intelligent and I know everything about the world. And then, I take a course, or somebody says, did you think of this? And I'm like, whoa, I did not think of that at all. And I have to go and study that thing and go in that particular direction. And because the university system has many different incentives for us to do that kind of thing, right? So if you're a student at universities, you get credit for your courses and you have to pay for that. If you're researchers at the universities, you have to do research, or else you don't get paid to do those kind of things. Same as professors and stuff like that. So we have to do a lot of knowledge discovery, and that's built in, that we're forced to actually do those things. And so it's more of a forcing mechanism. It's more of like a commitment contract to do certain things that we wouldn't have been able to do, or we wouldn't have done on our own. And as well as you have somebody, hopefully you have a good teacher or a good professor that is guiding you into different sort of weird directions and interesting directions that you might not understand why you're doing those things, but just aid your knowledge so you can make some connections in the future, right? So it's not just about the fact that having access is an important thing, but it's many different things that are going on behind the scenes in terms of why we actually learn and why we actually do things. So just having simply access and greater access and faster access doesn't mean that we are naturally going to be, we're naturally going to sort of invest in knowledge and not have the importance of universities there. So I think that's a little bit of a mute, and I don't necessarily agree with that comment is what I'm suggesting in terms of that they'll be completely online. I think what is going to happen instead is that universities will change in some very subtle ways that I think are really positive, and I think we're moving in that direction. So the first one is, and that I'm very optimistic about, is that the monetization model of education is changing. And, we do know that there's some real problems with having sort of debt, for example, investment in debt. Where we have a large number of students that have student debt that's hard to pay off, and then they sort of have a different position in life in how they respond to different things. They might be a little bit more fearful than if they didn't have that debt. There's many different things like that that sort of drive human behavior that I think are going to be changing. In that monetization model, there's some really positive things that are happening, where some groups and some organizations and some universities are starting to invest and taking kind of more of an investment approach to different people, where they invest in people and then people have to pay them back. The students have to pay them back over the course of 3 or 4 years based on how much they make, a percentage of their salary. I think that's a really cool model. And I think that that is a positive thing. But I also don't think that we're going to be getting, the idea of student loans are going to be disappearing anytime soon. I think they both serve a very vital, important function, right? So if we are, and let me explain this, right? So if we just go to this monetization model where we view universities or different funding groups as kind of venture capitalists, where they're just investing in assets that they believe are going to pan out in the future and make a lot of money for them in the future. Well, what's going to be invested in are things that generate a lot of money in immediate returns, right? So it might be things at this moment, and it's probably going to change, computer science, for example, right? Computer engineering, it might be architecture, any of the engineerings at this moment that do really well with that, maybe medicine. So that means that there's whole fields that are going to be underfunded with this kind of funding model that are vital to our society and how things work around us. that actually can be that can be funded through student loans. And perhaps they might be able to get better deals if this funding structure changes this way, right? Or perhaps people start valuing some of their education in a different way, so that some fields get really expensive, and then people have to sort of wait on why they would actually choose that thing and what's the importance of that field, and decide why it's actually really important to study that, and maybe recognize why it's important or see the underlying skills there. And the second thing I think is going to change quite dramatically because of these online resources and different things like YouTube, for example, is that we're going to move towards more of a commercialization and reputation model that is going to be a lot more like what you see in the arts and music, and what else, in software, for example, where it's going to be more like kind of like a freemium model, where what ends up happening is that there's going to be a lot of free resources that you can get access to. And you have to build your resources online, your reputation online, where it drives interest in person, right? So this is the reason why a lot of artists do things online, for example, and they put out free resources and free music online, because they want people to be excited about their music, and then they get a following online. And then whenever they go into that location or close to that location, then people are going to want to see that band in person. And I think that this model is going to become bigger in the sense that, as YouTube, as these different resources get much more stronger, that there's going to be a huge demand for that, where there's going to be lots of sort of free stuff, quote unquote free stuff like this that you can get access to. But then, there's always a component where you actually want to go meet that person, be part of their university, be part of the whole experience, just be really involved in what is going on at the particular university that you couldn't necessarily get in this sort of online thing. And I can't see that changing anytime soon. There's a lot of value that's being done in terms of communicating in person, and that is difficult to communicate online. I mean, all sorts of what is called tacit knowledge. This is knowledge that is difficult to transfer, and we don't really understand what it looks like. It's just difficult to codify some of this stuff. And so this is being transferred in person a lot more than on the online. But the cool thing is with online is that it is a global access, right? So lots of people can see this stuff. And it's part of the reason why the topics I talk about on this channel are geared in different ways than are not necessarily particularly about my research and stuff like that. Sometimes I'll talk about that, but mostly it's about dealing with many different things that happen that we can relate to more generally. And such, maybe somebody's interested, and then they'll end up, coming to this university that I'm at, or there's all sorts of opportunities that happen like that you don't necessarily see when you do these kind of things. And I think going forward, the model of how we see universities is going to be fundamentally changing, in the sense that this kind of communication is going to become more important, but it's going to drive a lot of the revenue and commercial activity that happens in person, and there's still going to be lots of value that happens there that we can't necessarily capture with an online kind of access thing like this. So that's what I think. I don't think universities are dead. I think universities are still going to grow. I think that they're amazing. I think that they are, very important parts, functions, business functions, commercialization functions, industrial functions, as well as sort of cultural functions of our society now. And I think that they're growing in importance. I think that they will continue to grow in the future in terms of importance. And I think that the way that we perceive university might have to change, and some of us might have to change the way that we think about this. But I think that there is a large, I think the potential is still there, and I think the potential is growing. And I'm not just saying that because I work at one. It's just something of thinking about this. I was never really somebody that was kind of a university kind of person. Wasn't academics is not in my family, and I was always pushing back and thinking about this. But as I've thought about it and seen, the research and the ideas and things like that about it, I really am thinking that it's quite positive in the future. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, do subscribe to the YouTube channel. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.